a lot of people think that the International Court of Justice should be stopping wars. And on the surface, this assumption appears to make sense, especially when you look at the name International Court of Justice. It's a court, it's supposed to give out justice. And some people attach that justice to some level of enforcement. However, this is not exactly how the International Court of Justice, this is not what it was structured and designed to actually do. It's not designed to stop any wars. And we're going to be looking in depth at the International Court of Justice, one of the principal organs of the United Nations. I'm Jay Chronic. This is Decoded HQ. Now, in one of our first videos within this United Nations series we looked at the United Nations General Assembly. Now, if you remember, the United Nations General Assembly can create a narrative, and that narrative can create a narrative around the state, right? So, for example, apartheid South Africa. They created a narrative that made apartheid South Africa unjustifiable, indefensible, right? Once they did that, it made it easier for countries now to act, right? It made it easier for the Security Council then to issue out the arms embargo, Resolution 419, basically to stipulate that apartheid South Africa wasn't going to get any weapons or to get any, to basically issue somewhat of a sanction so that countries don't do business with apartheid South Africa. That's the power of the United Nations General Assembly. The International Court of Justice has the same function, but a more serious one. When I say more serious, let me put it like this. The United Nations General Assembly creates a narrative through a political lens. So countries, member states would have voted for a decision to be made or for a resolution to be made to say, right, us as states, they make a vote and then they vote. Each country has a vote, one vote, and then they make a decision to say that, right, apartheid South Africa is bad, right? So in the resolution that ended up getting made by the United Nations General Assembly, it means that majority of all the countries within the United Nations believe that apartheid was bad, right? Now, when it comes to the International Court of Justice, they give a legal judgment on whether the actions of a country are bad or not. I see the United Nations General Assembly will make a resolution or pass a judgment based from a moral standpoint. Now, it is easier to dismiss a judgment from a moral standpoint because you could argue that morality is subjective. But it's harder to dismiss a ruling or judgment passed by the ICJ because they make a legal they issue out a judgment from a legal standpoint, which is harder to erase, and it stains the credibility and reputation of your country. The reason why we compared and contrasted the United Nations General Assembly to the International Court of Justice is because once you basically evaluate and you see the importance of the United Nations General Assembly, you can see now the importance of the International Court of Justice. So now we're going to be looking at the structure of the International Court of Justice just to now sprucing up your understanding of the ICJ. So what does the ICJ do? They settle legal disputes between states. They give advisory opinions to UN bodies. Now, they usually give advisory opinions to the United Nations General Assembly. On certain occasions, they have given advisory opinions to the Security Council. However, the Security Council don't really like outsourcing their power to other UN bodies, but there have been occasions where they have asked the United Nations, they have asked the International Court of Justice to give an advisory opinion. The example was when apartheid South Africa was occupying Namibia. The Security Council asked for an advisory opinion on how to go about basically trying to fix what was happening between Namibia and South Africa. The International Court of Justice then viewed that apartheid South Africa was occupying Namibia illegally, right? Illegal occupation. That opinion then influenced the Security Council to then issue out Resolution 419, which is the arms embargo, which made sure that there was a sanction on apartheid South Africa that they cannot trade with other countries in terms of weapons. A couple of things that the ICJ don't do. They do not judge individuals, they only judge on member states, right? They do not command armies. As I pointed out, the Security Council is very greedy with their power. Couldn't find a better word for it, but they don't like outsourcing any enforcement power to any other UN body. So basically, the International Court of Justice don't have any enforcement power um, on their rulings. So they can pass a judgment, they can pass advisory opinions, but they can't enforce anything. Now let's look at the structural constraint of the ICJ. Now in my previous video, we looked at the United Nations Security Council. Now if you remember, we said that in the United Nations Security Council, there are 5 permanent members: United Kingdom, the United States, Russia, China, and France. These 5 permanent members have veto power, so they can reverse any decision if it's not aligned with them. So all these countries need to be in agreement in order for a resolution or for anything to be enforced. Now we tie it in with the ICJ. You can see that if they pass a ruling, and obviously it would be a lot more effective if they had enforcement power, but they seek enforcement from the Security Council. If the Security Council, if one of these members believe that enforcement shouldn't happen, then no enforcement is going to happen. Or the ICJ can do is they can pass a ruling and say that occupation within a country is wrong. They can pass that ruling. But then if the Security Council are not in agreement with that decision or with that ruling, if any one of those member states are against that decision, no enforcement is going to happen. You see, the International Court of Justice are legally supreme but politically subordinate. They can define what is illegal, but only the Security Council can do something about it. And remember, there are constraints within the Security Council where the 5 permanent members have to be in agreement in order for any enforcement to actually take place. So they can see the ICJ passing a judgment, but the enforcement is reliant on whether that judgment does not infringe or does not go against the interests of the 5 permanent members. So if you're, for example, if you're a country like China and a decision gets passed by the International Court of Justice, and then you have a meeting within the Security Council, and then they decide that enforcement is required or military intervention or sanctions are required from the Security Council for them to impose, you as China, obviously, you would see that that goes against your own interests. You would simply veto that decision. Now, why is it like that? Remember, the primary objective of the United Nations is to make sure that another world war doesn't happen. And in order for them to do that, they must avoid the powerful states from directly colliding with each other. That is why each of these 5 permanent members, United States, Russia, China, the United Kingdom, France, they all have veto power because you don't want any of them getting angry and possibly colliding with any other of the other permanent members. Now, I know what question you're dying to ask me. How do we evaluate the International Court of Justice? We evaluate it like any other court. The only difference is we just remove the enforcement aspect of it. Does the International Court of Justice hear out cases? Yes, they do. Do they issue out judgments? Yes, they do. Do they provide clarity on certain political conflicts? Yes, they do. Do they settle disputes between states? Yes, they do. Do they have enforcement power? No, they don't. And that's the only aspect that we now remove from our assessment and evaluation of this particular organ. Now, we have now concluded our 3 major principal organs: the United Nations General Assembly, the United Nations Security Council, and the International Court of Justice. Now, I hate theory. I don't want to lie. I really don't like theory. What I do love is seeing all of these different organs in practice. And that's what we're going to do in our next videos. We're going to be looking at case studies where we get to see how these three particular organs get to function so that you have a better understanding of these three principal organs. Hope to see you in the next video. I'm Jay Chronic. This has been Decoded HQ.